All right. Robert, can you put the agenda up?
Everybody's voted.
Yep. All right. So please, you've probably seen this 100 times already this week. Note well, code of conduct and the patent issues. Please pay attention and follow these. First slide of the agenda. This is the things we have on the agenda. Is there any agenda bashing? Okay. Then we'll go ahead and get started. The first presentation is on divert. John?
Welcome, welcome, good people. It's Friday.
Hi.
It is the end. Hi. We're going to talk a little bit about divert, which is a document that has already been through working group last call. And when I press this, it does not
Nothing happens.
seem to do anything.
Next slide.
Okay, next slide.
Next slide, no.
So what is divert, and why do we keep working on this forever? Because this answers a pretty pressing issue for STIR, which is in a lot of these forwarding cases, you may end up with a two-header field being signed by Passport, but if something gets changed in midstream, that may not ultimately end up being the destination of calls. This is a property of SIP that has been understood for some time. You kind of heave SIP calls over the wall without much of a sense of where they will ultimately land. So we needed something that would show that actually there's going to be secure redirection, that if you hit a retargeting server of some kind, that it was the right server, and that this wasn't just, by some man in the middle, mangled somewhere, or cut and pasted by someone who is trying to impersonate a poor person who created a passport. So we created this special passport that's going to track just this. And it has this div extension to it, which lets you know how that redirection occurred. This is a problem that's been studied in SIP, for some time, this retargeting stuff. So we have like history info and the diversion header. This is a little different in part just because it's signed, because it's actually secure, unlike those mechanisms. And moreover, because of the canonicalization that's in STIR, this only really captures the major changes. Next slide. So what's new in 05? We've gone back and forth thanks to lots of interventions from various people over whether or not these passports should be nested or non-nested. What that means is, should you be able to have a passport that actually encapsulates the previous passport that you're diverting from, or should you store this passport in a separate identity header and then kind of figure out as the recipient verification service, like which identity header connects with which. And at first we did this like non-nested, and then we did where everything is nested, and then we realized that wasn't going to work, and so we ended up in this draft trying to find a compromise position. We've split the mechanism into two parts. The first part is div, which is for in-band. It's non-nested. In other words, you'll use multiple identity headers for this use case. And then we created this separate div O for nested. That will be used by things like out-of-band, which I'm going to discuss in a moment. And this tries to get around some capability negotiation concerns people had if we were going to have both nested and non-nested to be under div itself. It just seemed cleaner to fork these into two separate passport types. Additionally, thanks to the people at Addis kicking the tires on this one pretty hard, and I'm looking at you, Chris, and your buddy Dave Hancock, with these just huge number of use cases of how you actually figure out what authentication services and verification services are going to do in order to process this. We've beefed up that text considerably. I mean, if you look at 8224, which is really where the identity and verification services, authentication and verification services are specified, it's pretty specific to SIP because 8224 is specific to SIP. And so we kind of made this specific to the use of this diversion mechanism in particular. However, this was a pretty extensive overhaul. This has been through working group last call already, but this is a really, really different draft. And so probably some eyes are needed. Next slide. And is this jabber scribing or? As an aside in this, and this has come up, this is another thing we discussed many times in the course of trying to do div, this question of whether or not in baseline 8224, when you're putting a passport type into the identity header, the value of that should be quoted or unquoted. It turns out that 8224 is not particularly clear about this in the sense that it says like there's normative text, it says it must be quoted, and yet if you look in the ABNF, there's just like token, which I understand does not actually encompass the quote. Probably we need to errata this and to clarify kind of which of these parameters of the identity header are actually quoted. Since this just has come up in connection with div, we're trying to make this consistent across a whole slew of drafts that are actually doing new passport types. We should fix that. Next slide. Probably if I were one of the chairs of this working group, I would insist upon a new working group last call for this, but then advance it because this has already been baked into the specs in Addis and like we need this. So probably we should have a second working group last call and at least somebody should read it because like I wrote like a ton of new stuff that's in this. I guess you guys read it, but any comments about any of this? Anybody think that we don't need this or we should do something different?
Subir does, John, your previous slide, not related to this, but you said about the errata of RFC 8224 on that quotation, right? So does that mean that other claims what we defined, you have to do also corrections for that?
No. So I think we've been actually consistent in the drafts we advanced, like the shaken draft actually quotes it, we
Yeah.
quote it here. The problem is the 8224 is just ambiguous about it. So we just need to fix it there. But I think of the existing, including like RPH,
Yes.
all the things we've done, I think they all do it quoted.
Yeah, we did it quoted.
Yeah. So
Okay.
I think it's just like we just need to make sure 8224 is clear. Because right now it like says it's supposed to be quoted
Okay.
in like normative text. And then if you look at the ABNF,
Okay.
the ABNF doesn't actually allow you to quote it.
Okay.
So like we should probably fix that.
Okay, thanks.
So do we need to do a BIS?
In errata, it's just errata that.
Okay.
I mean, it's literally like one line change in it, right? So, any other comments? Anybody feel like reading this sucker again? It's kind of long at this point, but
We'll have to.
so again, it's not that Dave Hancock and people like that have not read this and extensively vetted it. So I mean, it's just not necessarily happening on the STIR list, which I understand is confusing.
Is there any chance I could get?
Yeah. Is there any chance I could get some concrete volunteers to do a second review of this thing?
Mary will read it.
Marion, who? We need at least one more.
It's pretty interesting stuff, right? It's like all this
Exciting.
shows you how like shifty. Thank you, Ben. I was gonna have to sell harder in a minute.
It'll give you a little bit of nightmares.
I do have like European money I need to give away, so.
Just to make it clear, I have.
Yeah, Chris has read it and like, it's actually been really thoroughly read on the other side. I have not read it personally. Other people read these things. I just write and keep my
So-
eyes closed.
So after Mary and Ben post their reviews, assuming they don't bleed all over it, we'll do a second working group last call.
I mean, I think you'd make that part of the working group last call, right? I mean, I don't know. Okay.
We can just last call and get them to do the review
Okay.
in that time.
All right, so I've been convinced we'll do them in parallel.
Pretty exciting stuff here. The STIR out of band. Oh, is that what we're doing? Or we're doing
Well,
RCD now?
I think we were planning to do, RCD.
Why don't we do RCD so then I can.
Yeah.
Okay,
Just tell me.
next page. Pretty much the update, there was actually 2 updates, but 3 was just a minor one to address a comment Russ had. The major addition here is adding J-card. We discussed this at the last meeting as well. So I don't think any surprises here. And of course, I extended all the examples, tried to include both normal stir and shaken as well. Next page. So now we have 3 standard key value key values that are inside the JSON object for RCD. Name, which is, I guess I should put it up there, mandatory. JCD, JCL. JCD is the embedding of the J card directly in the JSON object. JCL is a URL to, remotely retrievable JCard. Those both are optional. Next page. Have a bunch of examples in here. This one's just with a name, so pretty straightforward. The RCD says is the minimum RCD required. Next page. This is an example of a very verbose JCard. Just for those that haven't actually seen an example of it. I don't anticipate many that will look like this, but I just put a very verbose one in just for fun. Next page. And then the link one where, it has the required name and the link. I think it's pretty straightforward. It's required to be HTTPS, obviously. Next page. So I think there's a couple of things, and John, keep me honest if there's some things that I didn't include. Given the interesting discussion in Vimy yesterday, obviously we have talked about including logos. So I don't. Well, I don't know if we want to get into that discussion.
Well, I guess I'd say John Peterson, I think I will say recklessly that I think it is slightly more addressable for the use cases we're probably interested in here than it is for the email use case in the scope that was discussed yesterday. Slightly.
Mostly impractical rather than thoroughly.
Yeah, mostly impractical rather than thoroughly impossible. Yes. I mean, again,
I'd be curious to get feedback about phishing in general because, logo is something that looks like, could you say that CNAME is also a phishing attack? Could you also say that telephone numbers that look a lot like a telephone number you're trying to address?
So in other words, if
phishing?
you're being called by something that shows up as like James Bond, right, on your caller ID, there's a lot of people named James Bond, right? And which one is it? So I mean, it has a lot of the same, just caller name in general has this problem. And so I mean, I think
You're saying you're already screwed.
we're already screwed. we're not going to be any more screwed with this than.
Mary Barnes, I mean, I think we need this. This is when we talk about this over in the other forum, people are going to want to be able to see this, right? There's a lot of examples showing this.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like, I mean, I think part of the difficulty is we have like a pre-existing infrastructure that's designed to attach these numeric identifiers to some sort of textual thing. Now, that's just something like actually I could just like call up and be like, hey, my name is Barack Obama and I'd like a phone line, but the problem with this and Vimy for logos is like now you're constructing a new infrastructure that like we don't know how to manage, right? I mean, like how would this get populated? I guess is my question. Are we contemplating some new authority structure that
I mean, I think we need to think about those things for sure.
So yeah, I'm happy to put one up if you're going to give me money for it. No, but no, I mean, the point is like Apple does this like already, right? Like when Apple actually is calling you on your phone, like, an Apple logo appears. Like that. The problem is this is like in the wild. And the question is just, can we do better than what's in the wild?
Any other logo appear? So it's Google calls you, does an Apple logo? Yeah, exactly. That's right. It's like I think the not like exactly a worked example of like when Apple calls you like on your Apple device, the Apple logo appears. Like they have not attempted to arrange like the Cisco logo appears when you're calling your Apple device. Outstanding. It's a mission accomplished.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like, yes, we have an existing structure of authorities and we can like propagate that and authenticate it. And like that's only an issue if you're worried about kind of global interop, which I don't think needs to necessarily be the case.
I mean,
No, that was the whole objection.
so just to give one example of a way to scope this, I mean, I think the short answer is the global email-ish kind of problem that people are discussing is completely intractable. Let's say we just did this for North American free phone numbers. So North American free phone numbers have a very particular authority structure. There's this concept of something called a REST borg that's associated with every free phone number. And so if you're getting called by like 1-800-UNITED, like there's a whole chain of authority that determines like who that is, like who's on the hook to be properly testing who it is. And like I can imagine somebody creating registry that did it like just for that. And like, so that's the point. It would be like, you'd have to pick like a really narrow use case that would work for it.
Look, I mean, yeah, I mean, if your objective is like, that like only Fortune 500 companies are like allowed to like have logos, then no, that seems like eminently achievable. I agree.
Yeah, I mean, the contrast to the email case is those guys don't want they don't have these authorities pre-existing and they don't want to introduce them.
Yeah, I think that like if the Vinny guy's objective was like only like only the 4 email providers that matter, which is to say like Microsoft, Yahoo, and Google like had like logos that appear like that would like quite achievable as well, right? I mean the problem is they would like the RTFM logo to appear. That's where things get difficult, right? I don't think it's fundamentally a problem of like the existing authority structures. The problem is like figuring out who's entitled to use which logo, right? But I get like if the answer here is like it's only like huge companies, and like that seems like like we can build a mechanism to like transport the fake picture. That's not fun.
Russ Housley speaking as an individual contributor. I'm also worried about the fact that it's a URL to a logo file, an image. And there's no hash function in the signed thing to make sure that the website provider doesn't change the logos whenever they want. So I think we need to put some kind of integrity mechanism that makes sure the signer of the passport is cognizant of the logo that's going to be displayed.
Yeah,
John Peterson. So this I keep pushing back on Chris about this actually. So it's not Chris's fault because I'm not sure I actually get this attack for this use case. Like for the way that we're imagining that these JCards are going to be used, where it's the originating service provider that is inserting this. Like the originating service provider has control over what that URL is. It's an HTTPS URL. Well, that's the point. I mean, so I can imagine an operational practice where that is not, again, if the actual case that we would seriously consider for this is like Fortune 500 companies, right? They have websites that have HTTPS, that have URLs on them that they can point to. And if it's basically going to be originating side service providers putting this in, so I'm happy having it be optional. Because I can imagine use cases. Oh, you really want to
I am
mandatory?
not. And let me be clear about why.
Okay.
So that Fortune 500 company has a CDN in front of it. It is really not, the credential is not one-to-one as you're describing it.
So, but what does the impersonation threat model look like for this? That the CDN provider is going to spoof a logo so that they are impersonating someone?
The point is you want the signer to know what they're signing.
But again, everything we do here in STIR, we have a particular set of threats that we're trying to mitigate.
Yep.
And I don't understand in STIR's threat model of preventing spoofing that enables robocalling and these kinds of things. I don't understand what the threat model is for that attack.
But you are now adding a logo that is not bound by the signer.
So this is Sean Turner. 2 things from Eric Berger. The first thing is on the previous thing I slept. He said he would agree to review the previous draft.
Cool.
So let's make sure we put him in the minutes. And the other thing is Eric said is he's concerned that, or that the logo is some kind of tracker. He also says, no, we don't need to worry much about the tracker because we have a cryptographic identity. And after we finished talking about the reference being kind of a signature, we do know and can decide about showing per John.
So I want to make sure I understand the concern that you're raising, Russ, because it seems like there are 2 possible concerns. The one I thought you were talking about is the one where, I sign up for the system, I'm a tested caller, and and I have a logo which is like already been certified for the system, but then I'm United, and then I call John, and but then I change the logo to be Delta, and I'm like, sorry, Mr. Peterson, your flight's canceled, why don't you come to United? Is that the attack you're thinking about, or is that you're thinking about that on something else?
So that's kind of what I'm saying, but I wasn't quite thinking of exactly one Fortune 500 claiming to be an
the attack you're thinking about is
a swapping of what gets displayed.
Or
the website gets hacked,
right? So
right, and you get the the Mickey Mouse ears on top of the.
Right. So okay. So the attacker here is not the valid attesting party,
Correct.
but then some other where the logo is actually hosted, right?
Correct.
So I mean, I guess I too would be somewhat happier with like this being treated as a link, but not as an authority. I'd actually be happier for another reason, which is I'm concerned about the fact that that every time I want to find out, like every time I get a phone call, now I have to like go back and hit the website. And that seems like for the reasons Russ is just indicating, like if this is like Akamai, then Akamai had no other reason to learn that United called me, but now they do. And so having a hash solves that problem as well, because then you can just do hash caching. So I guess my question to John and Chris would be like, what resources are being conserved by not having this hash?
Right.
I mean, I was just like, this seems like belt and suspenders. And yeah, I mean, you saw the J card, it's big. Okay. Oh,
So I
fine,
saw,
we can make the hash mandatory. This is
I
not a
saw
big
that-
deal. I was happy to have it be optional. We can have it be mandatory. It's fine.
I saw that W3C has like an integrity header that is essentially just algorithm and hash.
I mean, the defacing the logo possibility. I mean, I guess I can see that as an attack, right, on brand identity or something. And
And
so,
just to be clear, like, should it be a hash across the whole J card, including the URL and the image, or
No,
both?
just-
or
just the
just
image,
the image.
in this case.
The URL and the hash of the image together.
Correct.
That's all right.
That's exactly right.
the URL and the image?
No,
The hash, what the hash says is that the object consists of a URL which points to the image and a hash which is the hash of the image. And what the semantics are is if you went and got this image, you would get this hash when you hash the thing, right? And so then that's it. The two properties, like to be clear, are like number one, when I do that, if the hash is a mass, I got a problem. And secondarily, like if I already have an object with that value in cache, I just display it rather than looking it up.
Right, right.
That's like contradecible data. You don't have to do cache validation at all.
I guess we'll have to figure out how to insert that when we don't, like JCard doesn't already have something. Well, maybe we could define a JCard thing, but it would have to know which thing it's pointing to, which thing the hash is referring to in the JCard. So we'll have to figure some of those things out, I guess.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a way to do that.
Yeah.
It's JSON, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
But not wrong.
No, please.
Well, we can give it to that JS contact.
So from Eric Berger at the mic, at some point, the URL plus hash will be on the order of the size of the JPEG.
No.
Eric, Russ's response is no.
And maybe for a typical, like, remember the one I showed was probably a lot larger than most, but yeah, I agree it would be shorter. I mean, we're already talking about multiple identity headers and everything anyway, so. Okay, good conversation. Next one is something, I think there's already text in here, but I think we want to flesh out more. Thinking about at a station level for, how much authority you have over the RCD information. For third-party providers that, either directly own that information or maybe have got it from secondary source or those types of situations. Obviously need to expand all the security considerations. I guess the point is here, I think we still have a little more work to do, for sure, especially after that past discussion.
John, again, do we want to talk about like JCard versus JS contact?
Oh, right.
versus-
Yeah. Obviously, there was in dispatch, there was a new effort for J contact. No.
Canonical.
JS contact or something. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, this is a different thing. So there's somebody else who wants to do their own 7095.
What did you say? Maybe I misunderstood.
JS contact. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just an alternative way to basically do vCard in JSON but their plan is not to adhere strictly to vCard semantics.
Right.
And to actually do this in a way that looks more like a real JSON object should.
I mean, I don't think there's huge issues here. It's more just a matter that, like the JSON was sort of directly translated from XML and it's a little fugly.
I mean, it is, right? So sorry, this is Sean Turner. I mean, it is, but like I do kind of like the idea of tried and true and it's been there and they're just converting it.
Yep.
The new concept kind of like, right, okay, great. We're going to get
Yeah.
libraries to do what with what?
Right.
And I guess, it's JSON, so it's really simple and cool and easy.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we have it and, it should work.
Yeah, Mary Barnes, as an individual, since I chair dispatch, I would rather us not do that because we didn't agree the way forward for that, right? So we have a little.
No, yeah.
Okay, I'm just adding one more.
The other,
Let's not do it,
it's
yeah.
just to address, in case people are questioning it.
Right.
But we also, you can always define new key value pairs and documents in the future.
Right, yeah. But let's not do it now, yeah.
Right. Good. All right, I think that's it for me.
I blew it. Hold on. I was blowing it again for Eric. It's two things. I don't think we need to wait another year for JS card if it happens at all. By the way, 608 shows JCard is good enough. Whatever 608 is. This
That's the,
document.
the
Yeah.
reject.
Yeah, so 608 shows JCard is good enough.
Yeah, I think everybody's agreeing on that point, so I'm good. Thanks.
So real quick question for Eric. The Medico presentation layout that's in front of me is not what I'm used to in the past. I don't know if I get to see a remote queue if anybody gets into the remote queue. So if somebody's tried and it's failed, please complain and jabber. Yeah.
It's supposed to pop up.
By the way, the secondary audio problem seems to have been fixed.
Yeah, we saw them pop a shell up and just type some stuff.
Okay, so we're going to go back to out of band now.
Fantastic. It's actually IETF 103.
Yeah.
Anyway. So out of band, stir out of band. We have this problem, and this is why we've kept working on this for years, that it turns out that some telephone calls don't actually use SIP end-to-end. And I know in this day and age, like, what does the world come to? But it's true. WebRTC, H323 is still out there. The ghost of H323 haunts us all. But because of that, since really we defined SIP initially, or defined stir initially in 8224 as pretty much a SIP-specific service, we've done a lot of meditation about like what you're going to do for these cases when calls, especially only partially go over SIP. And like if there's any hope, if the call like starts in the IP domain and then it goes through a gateway and then it's going through the PSTN and it lands in a smart endpoint, is there like something we can do? And this is how we come up with this basic stir out of band architecture that has this concept of a CPS, a call placement service, which is a place you can store a passport from an authentication service or maybe even a gateway in some cases. So if calls then go through some non-SIP network, there's a potential at least that they could be retrieved from the CPS by a terminating verification service. And you could still get something like the assurance of passport and baseline stir. Seems like it's a really cool idea. Next slide. So we've been spinning this one a lot. This also has been through working group last call. During that process, actually, Robert found some good bugs and just cut and paste errors and cruft that was in it. We had kind of been going back and forth in previous revisions over whether the best way at the CPS to index these passports was by the calling party number or the called party number. And we kind of had this consensus previously that it should be under the called party number. But when I really got out the thumb screws, I found a lot of text actually that was still in the previous version referring to doing it at the calling party number. And that has been extirpated dramatically. We also added a new enterprise use case. A lot of enterprises are actually kind of interested in this, and I'm hearing this more and more when I go talk to companies about stir these days, that these are the use cases maybe most interesting for the CPS and for out of band. And one that we didn't really cover in the way we described it was an inbound call center enterprise that would have an extremely high volume. And the main thing that we added to describe that use case in this is the notion that there could be a notification interface. Basically, you would like subscribe to the CPS so that if there are tons of calls coming in, you'll just get the passports rather than it being something where you have to like go fetch them basically when a call comes in, because that's completely misaligned with the way that these high volume call centers would work. And there's a couple of different architectural ways we can do that. But remember, this draft is intended really just to give an architecture and a framework rather than an immutable concrete protocol specification for how this is supposed to work. So we just want to kind of outline at a high level how these different techniques could be implemented. Also, because of those changes I mentioned to div, we now have this div O, which we pretty much made for out of band. So I had to go through and align the text with the new div O stuff. Finally, did a little bit of reorganization to try to kind of just decouple more the description of the use cases and the architecture from, the kind of straw man solution that we proposed for this, which Ecker came up with some great stuff for how we could try to do this at like a public CPS in a way that has some hope of being secure and minimizing data for privacy purposes. Next slide. So like all that said, the changes actually weren't too dramatic to this. It has gone through a working group last call. I don't know if people feel like we need a second working group last call because I added this new enterprise use case and like fixed stuff. But our ambitions for this draft are actually like pretty modest. Again, we really just want to get like the idea out there, the architecture, make sure people understand it enough. And I think once we see some of these toy deployments that I keep hearing rumors are going on, beef up a bit, we may be able to do some more concrete specifications for some of those use cases. I imagine that there could actually be a couple of protocol specifications that will end up relying on this architecture. So I'm in the mood to declare victory, but if people want to do a second working group last call, I'm cool with that.
I think that it would benefit from having a second working group last call and a couple of dedicated reviewers. This one's easy. Somebody would like to volunteer to do, some easy work. So we got Chris, Mary, and Sean.
Oh, fantastic.
Thank you.
Fantastic.
So, working on it.
So my last one said it was IETF 103. This one says IETF 104.
You at least have the place the same in both of them.
I know.
So,
Maybe not. Somebody should really pay attention when they do these slides. Okay, this is our exciting discussion. My last exciting discussion of the week about my new draft, draft Peterson Stir CERT delegation. This is a lot of fun. This is, again, another thing I talk to people about like all the time out in the industry these days. It's really hot, again, especially for some of these enterprise cases and for OTT providers. And we alluded to this when Sean and I did RFC 8226. We had some text in there saying, hey, there should probably be like some way you can delegate these resources so that if you have an OCN or a telephone number block, you can create a subordinate certificate from that will invest some subset of your authority to a different administrative entity. And this is something that's obviously been extensively studied by good people like Russ and Sean in X509 since time immemorial. So there's plenty that we can steal, but still we just need a way to explain how it's going to work with the things that are specific to 8226, which mainly means the TN off list object that we added to X509 in order to be able to talk about who owns telephone numbers and service provider codes. So we needed to document that, like what this means for that type of certificate. Gives some indication for how authentication and verification services would deal with certificate chains, which is not something we've really given any guidance on previously. And finally, the interaction with ACME. As many of you know, over in the ACME working group, Chris and I and Mary have worked on a set of authority token mechanisms, as we call them, that kind of, in the anticipated deployment architecture, especially in Shaken, are used to inform ACME servers of what you want out of a certificate and to make sure that the proper policy entities have vetted the certificates that are being issued. This is not a long draft, and honestly, I hope it doesn't need to get much longer. To accomplish those three objectives does not take a lot of work on our part. And like I said, this supports a number of enterprise use cases. Could it do something for end users? Yeah, but we're not worrying about that now. Maybe someday that'll be something we want to talk about. Next slide. I mean, This is just a picture of what that delegation would look like. 5280 and innumerable other specifications in the IETF give you an idea if you've got delegation and certificates and you're relying party how to do path construction validation. The paths that would look effectively like the things you see here. There's some root authority that's responsible for doling out these numbers. You can imagine the carrier in the middle layer of that then has two enterprise customers, to one of whom it doles out a block of 100 numbers, to another a single TN, say 1-800 United or something that they need to use and have a certificate for. And, we have a concept that there can be like sub-delegations built into this as well. So you can imagine under that 100 TNs enterprise block, that enterprise can in turn sub-delegate to an entity like a single one of those TNs, or maybe regionally distribute them or whatever. And the notion is once we have these delegated certificates, authentication services in STIR will sign with them. And it pretty much will work just like STIR always works. It's just a cert. The difference is the verification service then needs to, when it gets this thing signed by this delegate certificate, to evaluate the certificate chain and to figure out path validation for it. Fortunately for us, because this is so hierarchical, we don't really have the kind of path construction problems that you classically encounter in PKIs, where there are diverse trust anchors and you're trying to make your own path to the trust anchor that you like out of a set of possible paths that could be there. We imagine for practical deployments of 8226 certificates, that's actually pretty rigid. There's going to be one way to build a path. Which is really handy because that stuff gets insane how you do that. Next slide. So the model that we stole from for this, and there were a few to choose from, is based loosely on the semantics of our PKI, which contains this concept of encompassing. That basically each certificate in the chain is going to have a TN-auth list that is encompassed by the scope of authority of its parent. There is an alternative we considered, which is doing something like classical 5280 name constraints. I think our feeling about this is that TN-auth list is the constraint, right? There's no need to have a separate thing that says this is the constraint for these other lists. The TN-auth list is the constraint itself of what can be delegated from an individual cert.
Yeah, +1 as Richard Barnes. That approach, kind of the necessary and sufficient condition for that is that the relying parties are clearly instructed to enforce that hierarchy.
Right, which they are, which is why there's authentication service and verification service behavior in here that talks about what the expectations of the verification service are. Now, in the interest of full disclosure, there are some hard edges on this when it comes to delegating from an OCN, say, from service provider code to a TN block. This requires domain expert knowledge of the verification service to determine the validity of encompassment. And like this is something that I don't know how to fix. I mean, I think there is literally no fix for it. So what this practically means, just to get into this a little bit more deeply, like there are databases you can look in. It'll tell you which telephone numbers are under which OCN, right? And you basically just need to have access to something like that database in order to be able to make the decision of whether or not a particular telephone number or block is encompassed by an OCN.
Which sort of reads to me like cert chains that have one of these OCN to TN hops will effectively not be globally verifiable. Like if I place a call to Malaysia and they're trying to verify against some Czech database, like they're probably not set up to do that. So which is honestly kind of okay with me because most of the use cases probably within zones where people have this stuff set up. And that where it fails, it seems like it creates pain and back pressure for people to do TN all the way certs.
Sure, and this is something that emerges from a very particular set of North American deployments. Will have this property that are based on the Shaken principles. I don't think for the general technology of how delegation should work for STIR, those assumptions always apply. That much said, the set of entities that participate in the IPNNI, right, in ATIS, are the set of entities that have access to that. Right? And so the places where people are signing things that will have this property for OCNs in the first place are the people verifying it are the people that basically have access to those resources to do so. And like, it's a trusted network in the 3324 sense. So these things have to be stripped if they exit it. And so if it leaves that trust domain and ends up in Malaysia, the shaken passports will be stripped anyway.
Yeah, Mary Barnes. I mean, I do happen to know that you can get this data from somebody. We have it out there. And I agree with Richard's point, but we have other problems to solve if we want this to be, globally
To
usable.
work in Malaysia, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, basically,
Lot
again,
bigger problems.
these things are stripped to trust boundaries, right? These shaken passports are, so.
Yeah, Chris, when I was going to say, like, this is a journey we set off where, we're slowly transforming the network and I think this is just the next phase that we're trying to embark on, and hopefully, the network will evolve and we can evolve with it.
Yep.
So this is Sean Turner, basically echoing all of that. The part that I was going to say at wherever we were when this came up before was to explain that there's this verification system that is going to be there, and it's going to do all of these checks. And like the worry about like a CA is just going to pop up out of the blue and start doing stuff, pretty going to be hard for that to happen in this system.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm not going to say not going to, but it's going to be pretty hard for it to happen. So that's all I want to say.
Yeah, this is Richard Burns again. I didn't mean to say that like this should be a blocking consideration. I think it would just be good in this document to be clear that the hard edge, and a nice to have might be to like provide some links to help people connect to these databases. So it's just an authorization thing instead of a location thing. But I think it's a workable problem.
Sure.
Chris, just also a note, I mean, that's sort of the assumption we already have in Shaken that, right now it's an implicit association to an OCN, and you should verify technically on the verification side that telephone number is owned by that OCN. So we already sort of have that assumption built into the whole framework.
Built into Shaken, yes. And yeah, I think I think I even put in already a line that kind of gives this, caveat emptor about this part of the mechanism. But the one thing I do want to make clear is we designed STIR here, not Shaken as well. And so we're giving very high level mechanisms for this. And Shaken is going to have to specify all this in far more detail because it's like an actual operational profile for using this in that context. We are just creating the, code points that are filled in by the profiles that execute this. So, is there anything else you wanted to say? Yeah, so I guess the other thing we do is we stole shamelessly from Acme this application PEM certificate chain to be the way that X5U and Passport will convey certificate chains when that is necessary. And so I think that just works. We do actually change it a little bit. I think I have another slide about that. But finally, there is a bit of text in there that puts in these hooks to our authority token work in Acme. To be clear, we want to create the hooks for it. We are not trying to imply that the only way to get a delegate certificate is with Acme. In other words, like if you have some other interface because you're a carrier and you just want to have a web service where your customers can connect to you and you get them credentials, these delegate certificates through that, that's fine. We're not saying you have to use Acme, but we want to, since Acme seems to be a common case for this, we wanted to make that available.
So this is Sean Turner. I look at this as future-proofing the document, right? You're like, well, if this comes on and we're going to do it, we might as well just put a pointer, and Bob's your uncle, so.
Yeah. Bob is my uncle. I actually do have an Uncle Bob. He died of alcohol poisoning as I will. Yes. So, let that be struck from the minutes, please.
I'll edit the YouTube recording later. Yeah, it does seem like there's some general PKI issuance stuff that might be good to reflect as security considerations here, like making sure you prove possession of private keys.
Yeah.
Like if you're going to do some non-Acme thing.
Fair enough. Oh, fair enough.
But
Yeah.
just kind of as advisory, like if you're going to go off into the wild, watch out for these bears.
Good point. Yep.
Well, there will be a CP.
Yeah.
Yeah. Next slide.
Yeah.
This was just, I put this in just in case I wanted to refer to the Acme architecture. I don't think I need to. I think everybody here probably gets it and what we're doing with it. Next slide. Okay, so like I said, we want to keep this modest. There are a few things that are future work that are connected with this, and this is partly also a future work of the STIR working group kind of creep discussion here. But the one thing that's very closely tied to this is the concept of partial delegation. And this is something I hear people talking about in the industry. This notion that you want to be able to delegate authority to another entity for a very narrow purpose. So in other words, let's say I have a service bureau who does all of my MMS traffic and I'm a carrier and I'd like them to be able to like sign my MMSs with STIR. Can I create a delegate certificate that empowers them to do that, but not to sign calls? So that like relying parties, if they see, oh, the service bureau has decided to start signing, actual voice calls, something has gone wrong. This, again, is something that I hear some people are interested in. I could see doing that at some point. I would probably punt that to a separate draft if we were to do so. But if there are any hooks we need to put into this to make sure we don't close the door on that possibility, we might want to do that at this point.
Chris, I just had a thought. Would that potentially apply to 8226 as well?
Oh, sure. So
Not just delegate? So-
we mentioned this in 8226 as like
Oh, that's right.
possibilities to
Yeah,
work. We actually say, oh,
Yeah.
there could be a
Sorry.
way to do
Okay.
this at some point.
I have 3 letters for you and they are EKU. Right, which means like this could, it seems like pretty cleanly extensible. So
Sure.
like do it here or elsewhere as you see fit.
And yeah, again, we do not want to try to reinvent X509 or any of that stuff here. So this delegation stuff's pretty new. My experience has been is we specify these things in the IETF and then there's work on the ATA side. Sometimes we need to make changes to reflect the wisdom of the folks at ATIS. So imagine getting alignment with ATIS on this. Probably some things will shake out of that we don't know what they are yet, but that is that is a leading cause of things in STIR going on slowly. The wheels of STIR, they grind slow but fine, is my philosophy. So finally, just kind of 3 other pieces of work that are related to this. Delegation cases enable a lot of enterprise calling architectures. And as soon as we start talking about that, we're going to start talking about connected identity. What does connected identity mean? This is STIR in the reverse direction. When I call you, I want to make sure I reached the right party. And so there is a backwards direction passport that comes with this. There are enterprises that are interested in doing that. And precisely with the RCD-ish kind of advanced display mechanics to make sure people know that they've connected to the right party. I imagine that once this is fleshed out enough and RCD is fleshed out enough, that is something we will be returning to work on because it's actually kind of cool. I always like that connected identity stuff. And all that SIP Brandy jazz actually plugs into that as well. The other thing that this leads us back to is short-lived certs, which has been parked in the back burner as we've tried to figure out the Acme stuff. I think we have ATC and Acme pretty well specified at this point. I think we're pretty close to being able to lock that down. One of the main use cases for short-lived certs is I want to be able to delegate this to an enterprise on a very short leash. And so as a consequence of that, imagine the short-lived certs work will probably come back just to support in general the way people are probably going to use this delegation out there in the wild.
So Acme already has stuff
STAR and
Well,
STAR delegation. And,
Well, STAR, but even just like 8555 has fields where you can say, I would like this to be this short. And
Sure.
the CA can apply policy. Do you know like what other work is necessary here?
like we had a bunch of stuff in the short-lived certs document that talked about the trade-offs with OCSP. Because remember, this is when we were trying to figure out, should we do like OCSP stapling or for validation?
Yeah,
And
it's
so
coming back to me now.
yeah. And so, I mean, we're basically just going back to that draft and making sure that it plugs in with this and with the results of ACME, right? Just say, this is ATC, this is how you specify an ATC, and the CSR you want like this from this cert. And I mean, it's not like we've done a lot of thinking about when you get an authority token, like should the token authority be able to say like your expiry is like, 5 seconds because like you're a punk. And, but I mean, the interaction of the whole thing, I think for STIR is what we need to capture in this document. So expect that to come back. The other thing that may come back as a consequence of this, and I talked about this a couple times and like never done anything, is certificate conveyance in SIP and how we might want to do that. And why that becomes especially salient for these delegation cases and for these enterprise cases is that if you imagine that like the only certificates that you care about for signing STIR belong to like 7 carriers, it's very simple for you to have their certificate, cache it, keep track of it when it's going to roll over. If, however, Chris goes crazy and delegates, 100,000 individual TN certificates to a set of customers in a, pilot city somewhere, acquiring those certificates actually, is a slightly more cumbersome process. And so we've talked about doing X5U with CID, where it's actually like a message body that contains the certificate. But it's not like we've ever fleshed that out or really figured like how that would work, or should it be a header? Should we, are these certificates going to be small enough? Now, of course, these will be chains now because these are delegate cases that we're considering. Can we fit one of these chains in a header? Well, not in application PEM certificate chain, right? It has syntax is incompatible with it being in a header. So it would be something like CID, right, for this.
I mean, Jot does have an X5C slot where you can stick these things.
Oh,
So-
really?
Yeah, they're, I mean, it's defined, like, you'll have this giant Jot with the whole,
Oh, really?
but it exists, so there's something to reuse.
Maybe we should do that. X5C. That would, of course, change everything that's in 8025, but
Chris went, I was just going to bring up sort of somewhat related topic of key or certificate rotation mechanism. I know we've had some conversations about it, but just maybe to make a more broader audience aware of, like, is there mechanisms that if we don't convey it directly, can we have a pointer to something that, hey, this is going to be my next cert, so maybe you want to grab it before the other one expires, type of thing.
Yep. I mean, that's a generic X5 capability, and we should probably do that in the appropriate venue. Yes.
So hi, this is Sean Turner. I just want to echo that CRLs suck. It's not really working out well. If this is the impetus that like gets industry to like start thinking about things and make it do something better and faster in the whole 9 yards, I'm all for it.
Proper.
Yeah, Mary Barnes, definitely. I don't want to have to figure out CRLs for this stuff. So
No, me neither.
Well, so, you say future work, can we roll that one up into next version sort of stuff?
Well, so again, it's
Yeah.
existing draft, right? It's not like we're going to put it in the delegation draft. Like we have a short-lived search draft. We just need to actually go work on it.
Well, okay.
So you're volunteering to work with me on short-lived search.
Okay, I will. I will.
Thank you.
Yes. I don't like CRLs.
Yeah. All right. So yeah, that's basically my laundry list of things I think, because we're wrapping up out of band. We're wrapping up div, this delegation stuff. Honestly, I don't think it's that much work. What is work is now plugging all these together into the set of things that you see on the bottom there.
Chris, I just want to sort of say, like, this is very important stuff that is sort of hitting ahead. People want to know how at least VoIP providers can start signing calls and things like that. So, getting this done is important, and getting it done quickly is also would be a nice thing too.
So, I mean, we do need to just, we need to carve this delegation thing to, I think, the smallest usable incarnation of it and push it quick. Because yes, this is something Chris and I are just getting hammered about in the industry. So
Plus one, like from the vendor perspective, we've got customers asking for things like this. They're hearing about STIR now, and if it's getting attention, they want the authentication, and this is going to be a critical enabler for, scaling this out to
enterprise
having
users,
end parties do the authentication.
Yeah. Next slide. So yeah, I mean, I think there's enough meat on this that I would call for adoption if people are interested in adopting. All that future work stuff, I would say we'll do separately from this particular document. Obviously, review is welcome. Figuring out what we need to flesh out more. I mean, yeah, we need to do security considerations and privacy considerations, all that kind of stuff. But like, what more mechanism we need for this would be helpful. But Jairus, what are your thoughts?
I think we can issue a call for adoption on list after the meeting, but I'd like to get a sense of the room. If anybody doesn't think that we should adopt this, could you hum now? And if you do think we should adopt it, hum now. Yeah, so the room thinks that this is the right thing to do, but I think we do need to throw that out to the list. So.
Sure thing. It is Friday, and nobody's here. And I'm not actually here. So, okay, I think that's it.
Yeah, I think that's it for this.
I think we're done.
I'm slacking again as my microphone man for Eric. Eric says, Mike, I think it should be adopted, way more important than OOB.
All right, well, it is the end of our agenda unless anybody has any other business that they want to bring. Thanks for participating.
Adam Roach, I just wanted to highlight that one of the things that came out of the discussion we had around RUM, which is looking at techniques for incorporating like interpreters into like calls for hard of hearing, that it may be useful to revisit whether we want to do work on call to party identity, because
That's the connected identity stuff.
right, yeah.
But then
been kind of back burner.
Yeah. So I just had that on my last slide. Like connected identity stuff was part of the future work I was just talking about, is fixing that. Yes, we definitely need it, and we need it for them as well. Thanks.
So one quick question for the people who have volunteered to do reviews in the last calls. Does anybody have vacations or something that would make having this last call happen starting next week difficult? Okay.
Great. Thank you very much. I think we're done, and safe journey home. Did a lot in an hour.
Yeah.
Twist. So, 2 last calls and a call for adoption.
Yep.
Thanks, guys.
Discussion with Vegas.
I can prove my